evaluate further the previous example where we compare the age to 18. And the question would be, what if somebody entered an age of less than 0, which will invalidate the possible age range for a human being? So let's work with that. And in a next video or lesson, we will constrain that even further to make sure that we don't go above a certain age that is not humanly possible. But at this stage, we're going to compare and make sure before we actually say yes or no, if you're greater than or equal than 18, we're going to keep the same logic, but we have to also validate that the value is greater than 0. So let's go ahead and do our start of the program here. And this will lead us to what we call a nested if statement. So let's say we have a variable age that we will be dealing with of type integer, okay? And it is not initialized. This simply means that we have a variable age that we will be playing with throughout the program. So first thing we want to do is have the user enter. So this will be input here. And that would be input a value for the variable age. Now notice I don't put quotes around it. That is, I am referencing to the actual variable. Now, the next thing we want to do is want to make sure first that age is valid. Is age greater or equal to 0? Now 0 might be a valid value. That means you were just born. Or if you want, you could say it has to be exclusively greater than 0, which makes 0 an invalid value. Fine. So that means if we're dealing with integers, then 1 will be a valid value, 2 will be a valid value, -1 will not be, 0 will not be. Okay, so if you want to work the logic to follow that pattern. So the answer is either it's true, which means it is greater than 0, or simply false. Okay? Now, if it is true, maybe this is the time where we need to compare to our previous logic. Is age greater or equal to 18? And I'll put a question mark here. True. You will print a yes. So we're going to print a yes. So out. And notice I'm going to put yes between quotes, which means that's the string message that I want to display. If it's false, that's fine. Notice I'm shorting false with F and true with T. And notice here, I am going to print out simply no. This if statement has to converge through this connector, and it has to converge with the outer if statement, which is the first one. Now here we might print a message that says maybe something like this: invalid value or invalid age. And this is what we mean by validation. So this here, that means the value, if it's 0 or less, we would like to tell the user that they've entered the wrong value. Notice here, these two converge. Let me just clean it up a little bit here. So we have a connector. And these two flow lines simply converge here. And we're going to get out and continue with our program. Print here. End of program. And officially end the program right here. Okay. All right. So let's implement this flowchart into code. So let's go to our code. And this is what we had before. We had an if statement with an else. Let me redo this from the beginning. So we're going to do if statement with else and with initial validation. The reason I'm saying initial, that means we will be testing the validation first before we do any of this. So let me just delete this for a second, right? And we're going to do this first. So if age is greater or equal to, or in our case, we said greater than 0, then we're going to ask the next question. If, notice this is what we call a nested if statement. Age is greater or equal to 18, and notice the indentation, then we will print yes. Else we'll print no. But notice where the else lines up to. The inner if statement. Else, we're going to print no. And now we're going to need an else for the validation, which means it was not greater than 0. Notice that else lines up with the first if statement. Else, and we're going to print invalid age. So this is very important because this else here lines up with this if, which means it's when you tested if the age was greater than 0. If it was false, you will execute what's under the else here and disregard this whole block. If it is true, then you have another question or another filter to go through, which means are we greater or equal to 18? The answer is yes. Great. And we finish we converge. Let's look at the flowchart for a second here. If it is yes, follow the line. We're going to converge here and continue on and print end of program. If it is greater than 0, but let's say it's 12, then it will be false. It will say no. Notice the flow, and it will go to end of program, and we go this way. Let's say we entered -3 right here. Is age greater than 0? The answer is false. Notice the flow, invalid age, and we're going to go to the end of the program. That is what our program here would follow. This is the implementation of that flow chart. Let's run this, and let's put in the wrong age. Let's put -3. As you can see, invalid age, enter end of program. So let's go ahead and do 0. And we know that's also invalid based on the logic that we've done here because we're not including 0 as being true. So now let's go ahead and put 1. And as you can see, we get the no because we're not greater than 18. So we've passed the test for the first if statement, but we failed the test on the second if statement. In other words, we executed the innermost else statement under the else of the innermost if statement. So let's go ahead and run it again and put 18. So we know that it is greater than 0, so it is valid. And not only that, we will get a yes since 18 is inclusive right there. So let me see. It did say, I did 10 here. So let me print 18 again. I have to watch what I'm doing. 18, here you go. There. And then we have a yes. So when I printed it 10, obviously it will say no. Let's print 22 now. Let's type in 22. Okay. Very good. So I hope you learned a lot from this one. So the next video, we will limit the age to 120 on the upper range.